Hey everybody, this is Mr. Mazzoro, and today I'm going to talk about something actually kind of interesting, something that you probably didn't know. Today I'm going to talk about this period of time, 200 million to 100 million years ago. We're getting pretty close to this area right here where human beings actually come on Earth. There are dinosaurs now. We're getting kind of more familiar. Pangea is beginning to break up. We see continents forming the way that we think of continents forming, but what you notice happens, and this is really what I want to focus on, is this. These guys come on the scene, and when these guys come on the scene, you'll notice that they very, very rapidly and way faster than any other organism up until this point take over the Earth. These are angiosperms, flowering plants, and to this day, they are the most successful organisms ever to exist on Earth. There are more flowering plants on Earth than there are types of insects, than there are types of beetles, than there are types of bacteria, than there are types of anything. Not only are they the most successful organisms presently to exist on Earth, but they're the most successful organisms ever to exist on Earth. There has never been a more successful organism than flowering plants. And what I'm going to try to explain to you today is the reason for this steep upward decline. Why did they so quickly surpass gymnosperms? Why did they so quickly surpass ferns and bryophytes? So that's what we're going to talk about. Why did flowering plants become so successful so fast? And how do flowering plants trigger, and the growth of flowering plants trigger the growth of non-plant organisms on Earth? What effect do they have on non-plant organisms? So, 200 to 100 million years ago, the Earth actually kind of looks like this. This is a modern day island off the coast of Australia. It's known as New Caledonia. And you'll notice that the trees on this island look really weird, and that's because after the breakup of the last ice age, this area never actually froze, never really suffered a lot of freezing damage. So a lot of the organisms that were around prior to the last ice age are around on this island. And what you'll find if you look really close on this island is you'll find this organism. You have to kind of look at it sideways, but this is actually, as far as botanists can tell, the first flowering plant ever to exist, basically in its pristine condition. The very, 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 very first flowers looked like this. And they're not much to look at, especially when we're used to looking at roses. They don't smell good. They don't smell like anything, in fact. But this was dramatic in terms of plant evolution. In fact, this was dramatic in terms of life. These flowers allowed plants to actually become the best organisms ever at reproducing. I say it a lot in class, but plants can't add, they can't subtract, they don't have muscles, they can't think. And so we tend to look at plants as being pretty primitive. But yeah, you're right, they can't do the same things as us, they can't build bridges, but that's because they didn't put their evolutionary energy into that stuff. Plants put their evolutionary energy into this. Flowers. Plants put their evolutionary energy into reproduction. And it's because they got really good at sex that they became way more successful in terms of evolutionary history and diversity than human beings or any other organism ever to exist on Earth. And there are three main reasons for that. There are three reasons why these flowers were so far and above the best reproductive structure on Earth to that day and even today as we speak. Number one. Flowering plants could reproduce a lot faster than cone plants. Flowering plants bud, pollinate, flower, boom, seed, you're done, bud again. As opposed to a cone plant which has to mate for an entire reproductive cycle. Faster reproduction meant that flowering plants evolved a lot faster than all other organisms and all other plants on Earth. And lastly, the seeds that flowering plants yield, like cone plants, have their own storages of food so they can stay alive a lot longer. All of those things put together allow flowering plants to basically take over. What's interesting is that we think of bees as pollinating flowering plants, but we're actually before bees. Flowering plants came along about 20 million years before bees. So the very, very first flowering plants were white. And they were white because they didn't need to be colored yet. There's nothing colored in this world. The world is green. It's just leaves. So a little glimmer of white actually is pretty attractive to really the only flying insect, or the flying insects that are around mostly at that time, which is beetles. Beetles were the first pollinator of flowering plants. And as you see, even today, beetle-pollinated flowers are still around, and they're all white, and they're all scentless. And the reason they're all scentless is because beetles can't smell. So you get this pollination that's specific to an insect. Before, pollen from conifers just blows around in the wind. It's pretty nonspecific. But now we have organisms, flowering plants, actually evolving to be pollinated by one thing. And that one thing isn't going to blow around randomly. It's going to fly around, flower to flower to flower, looking for those glimmers of white. And therefore target its pollination a lot better. And you get a lot more success rate with this new targeted type of pollination. After a while, flowers realize that targeted pollination and enticing their pollinator is even more important, so they start developing this stuff, nectar. Nectar is basically energy. Insects are looking for a sugar rush the same way human beings are. And that same primal urge, that same likeness for our sweet taste buds is predating us and actually goes back to this time in evolutionary history when flowers decided that they have to make themselves as likely as possible to attract insect pollinators. And they did that with nectar. Give you some ideas of what we're talking about with nectar. Nectar can be 400 times sweeter than Coca-Cola. It's literally a dense packet of energy that can give any insect that drinks it huge amounts of energy to do really whatever they want. Now, all those insects getting all of that energy triggers insects to start evolving and growing and co-evolving even with flowers, becoming specialists in pollinating. All those insects provide more food for things like mammals and birds. And then all of those provide food for larger carnivores. So now what we get is a connection between, there's all of these flowers to, oh my God, there's also all of these other food for all these other organisms as a result of it. Flowers getting really good at sex, targeting their pollination, allows for the growth and explosion of virtually every other land organism on Earth. So, why did flowering plants become so successful so fast? Because of flowers. These little glimmers of white in a dull green world that attracted insects, organisms for the first time, and allowed those insects to do their dirty work, flying from flower to flower to flower, rewarding them as they went, at first with just color, pollen maybe, but then eventually with nectar, and fueling the growth not only of insect populations, but organisms that eat those insects, and then organisms that eat those organisms, and organisms that eat those still. In the next lesson, what I'm going to talk to you about is all the different types of flowering plants and how botanists actually get their mind around how many different types. Because keep in mind, to this day, there are more different types of flowering plants than any other organism on Earth. But that's the next lesson, not this one. So I'll see you then.